Shiny object syndrome. This is a good one. Notebook LM was all over this. And they liked what I said, kind of.
Hey everyone, ever get going on something you're totally psyched about, only to fizzle out the second something else grabs your attention? You know, like shiny object syndrome.
That's real.
The struggle is real, right? Well, we're taking a deep dive into that today with Axel's story. He called his personal reflection pasted text, and let me tell you, it had me hooked.
What grabs me about Axel's story is how upfront he is. He's wrestling with this push and pull between like raw passion and that discipline you need to, actually make things happen. And it's something we all deal with.
100%. And Axel jumps right in, calling himself a dreamer, which, okay, sounds kind of nice, right? But you'll see, it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
True. On the one hand, you've got that fire, that vision.
Yeah.
But if you can't rein it in, forget it. You end up in that zone of almost there, but never actually arriving.
And that's where Axel was early on. Super stoked on a project, tons of energy, then bam, hits a wall. And guess what happens when the going gets tough? Yep, another shiny object pops up.
It's like our brains are programmed to crave the new and dodge anything that feels like work.
Totally. And get this, Axel was even making excuses for it, saying stuff like, the next big thing is right around the corner. It's that voice we all have in our heads sometimes. What if the grass really, I ask, greener over there?
Which sometimes, hey, it is.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, it's just dot grass. Same thing, different place. The real trick, like Axel figures out, is figuring out when this whole cycle is actually holding you back instead of, pushing you forward.
Oh, and talk about wake-up calls. He had some big ones. We're talking intense stuff like marathons, even a lawsuit that made him deal with those avoidance tactics head on.
Talk about a crash course. Those experiences, tough as they were, became turning points for him. Pushed him way past his comfort zone. And you know what? Showed him he had a toughness he didn't even know about.
Okay, before we get into those aha moments, I gotta read you something that really hit me. Axel writes, that meant I got the excitement worked on it to a certain level of being tired, and then when it started to hurt, that means I was tired enough that I had emotional pain, anxiety in general and other things, like headaches and stomach pain. I'd just drop it. Or I'd be lured away by the next new shiny thing. I mean, come on, you ever hit that point where the thrill is gone, you're just fried, and a new project feels like an escape? It's like that initial excitement turned into full-on burnout, right?
Yeah, and that's where those come to Jesus moments come in. It's like life was like, all right, Axel, enough is enough. And the thing that did it, a marathon. Talk about a metaphor for pushing through the rough stuff.
Seriously, he's talking about training, hitting that wall where your body just wants to quit, but he didn't. He pushed through it. And I feel like there's something powerful in that, applying that same kind of grit to creative projects,
Oh, totally. Think about it, that mental toughness, that stamina you need for a marathon to block out the pain, to keep your eyes on the finish line, even when you'd rather be anywhere else. That's the same muscle you need when you're in the weeds on a project and that first rush of excitement has faded.
It's like he learned to handle those creative challenges like an athlete would.
And hey, speaking of challenges, let's talk about that lawsuit Axel went through. Not a choice there, he had to stick it out. Exactly, no way around it. It forced him into this situation where his usual move, tapping out when things got hard, wasn't an option. And I think that's when a real shift clicked for him. It hit him that even when something matters to you, even when it's a passion, there's still a price tag.
And that price often comes in the form of exhaustion, frustration, right? Maybe some soul searching along the way. He had to ditch this whole it's all gonna be easy mentality, chasing your bliss should feel effortless.
It's a tempting thought, right? Especially in the creative world.
Mm-hmm.
You've got that whole tortured artist thing, feeding off inspiration and late night breakthroughs. But let's be real, that's not gonna work for most of us.
Not in the long run, that's for sure. Burnout is no joke. Axel talks about these periods of intense work followed by a creative hangover. Zero energy, zero motivation, feeling completely isolated. You ever been there? It's rough.
It's huge to acknowledge that part of it. It's not just about muscling through, it's about finding a sustainable rhythm.
Yeah.
Respecting those peaks and valleys that come with the creative process. And that's what I dig about Axel's journey. He doesn't just sit there feeling sorry for himself, he adapts. He goes from dreamer to doer.
So it's not like he flipped a switch and turned into this productivity machine, right?
Yeah.
What did he actually change to make this happen?
It's more like he learned how to make that dreamer side of him work. One big thing he did was get pickier about which projects he actually went for.
Like putting up some boundaries, yeah.
Exactly. Instead of jumping in head first, he'd really look at a project beforehand. Like, think about how much time it would take, what he'd need to make it happen, and most importantly, ask himself, am I ready to stick this out, even when it's a slog?
Because honestly, isn't that always the thing? Every project, even the ones that start out amazing, they all hit that point where you're just like, over it.
Yep, every single one.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's where the good stuff happens. Axel started making himself revise and finish stuff even when it felt, I don't know, boring, or when he wasn't feeling that initial spark anymore. He went from like obsessing over the end result to really being present in that whole process.
There's something so powerful about that shift, right?
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off needing everything to be perfect, and it opens you up to the idea that, like, yeah, failing is part of learning.
Totally. And he finally admitted to himself that not everything was going to be a home run. Sometimes it's more about the journey, you know? The learning, the pushing your own boundaries, even if no one ever sees the final product.
Which is a tough thing to admit, especially these days when it seems like everyone's caught up in results and awards and all that. But that's what makes his story resonate, I think. He's honest about the struggles, the self-doubt, all that messy stuff in the middle that nobody really talks about.
Exactly. And by being real about all that, he shows us that it's fine to be drawn to new things, to get excited. But the real magic comes from bridging that gap between the dream and actually doing it, from that first spark to putting in the work to make it real.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Axel's story, I'm left thinking, how do we do that like him? How do we balance that thirst for new experiences with the discipline to actually achieve something? It's a balancing act for sure, but like Axel showed us, it's definitely a journey worth taking.
Without a doubt. And remember, even if what you create doesn't get you fame or awards, the act of creating itself, pushing yourself and making your ideas real,
Yeah.
that's what really matters.